what are the other utopian or dystopian works? The first that comes to mind is Sir Francis Bacon, New Atlantis. That is utopian work. James Harrington had a book, The Commonwealth of Oceania and the System of Politics. So these are 16th century utopian texts. Then in the Victorian period, William Morris wrote News from Nowhere or An Epoch of Rest, being some chapters from an utopian romance. Charlotte Perkins Gilman recently wrote in 1979, Her Land, a last feminist utopian novel. You all know the name of Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. So this is a dystopian work, and George Orwell's 1984, another dystopian work. But there is a whole body of utopian and dystopian literature. It became a genre in itself. So in the first letter, Ralph Robinson writes to his friend Master William Cecil, who was the principal secretary to the king, and writes to him the reasons why he translates More's Utopia. Then Robinson writes a preface to the gentle reader, So these are not written by More, so I am skipping them. But when we come to More's writings, a letter to Peter Giles. So Peter Giles was a city clerk. When More wrote this book, then he was in the city of Bruges. He was abroad. He was in the city of Bruges on a diplomatic mission, and there Peter Giles was the city clerk with whom he often had conversations. And in Utopia, More writes that Peter Giles introduced him to Raphael Hythlodaeus, and then Hythlodaeus told his story. So Peter Giles becomes a character in Utopia also. In this letter, More describes Raphael as a man who is extremely well versed in Greek. As you know, I have not wherefore there was no cause why I should study to set forth the matter with eloquence, for as much as his talk could not be fine and eloquent, being first not studied for, but sudden and unpremeditated, and then, as you know, of a man better seen in the Greek language than in the Latin tongue. So More explains here why he writes this book in Latin. First, Raphael spoke spontaneously, therefore it was not well formed. Secondly, Raphael was a man who knew Greek much better than Latin, therefore he was not in a position to write in Latin. So that is why More takes up the onerous task of writing Raphael's story in Latin. Then here he writes, page 11 of this edition, in this letter, for as I will take good heed that there be in my book nothing false, so if there be anything in doubt, I will rather tell a lie than make a lie, because I had rather be good than wily. So you see, the truth claim of a work of art was conventional. As long as works of art have been written, writers and authors always felt a compulsion to say that what they are writing or they are narrating, that was true, that was a true story, not fiction. we saw that in the 18th century when English novelists Defoe, not Defoe, sorry, Fielding, Richardson, they write at the beginning of their novels that their story is a true story. Often it is in the title of the novel itself. The title used to be very long. The true story of such and such, person or thing. So this truth claim was a kind of a convention, a writer's trick to present his story to the reader as true and not fictitious, therefore to be taken seriously. More does the same. So in his letter he writes to Peter Giles that whatever I am writing, I am following Raphael's narration. Whatever Raphael told me. And the advantage of this trick was that if there was anything objectionable in the narration, anything that readers might object to as false, then More can say that this is what Raphael said. I am not asserting it. Okay. So here he says that I will rather tell a lie than make a lie. That is, my representation, my narration may contain some, mistake, some lie, some mistake, but I will not make a lie. That is, I will not deviate from Raphael's narration. So if I deviate from Raphael's narration, then I am making up. Then I am, indulging in falsehood. So I will be faithful to Raphael's narration, and if that narration contains some mistake or falsehood, then I am telling a lie, but I am not making it up. Okay. Is it clear? So this kind of argument convinces the reader about the credibility of the whole story, that yes, this is the story that Raphael said, that Raphael told and More faithfully followed. And since Raphael told from his experience, this should be a proper story. Now, very interestingly, More never mentions in the whole of his book in which sea the island of Utopia is situated. Now obviously the readers will not accept it easily, that you tell the story about an island, about its people, and assert it, assert all their customs, civilization and everything, and you do not know the sea where the island is situated. People won't accept it. Therefore, in all these paratexts, these letters, again and again, More writes to Peter Giles, to Jerome Buchleiden, that please speak to Raphael and let me know the name of the sea. I have forgotten it, I missed it, and the moment you learn it, you let me know so that I can revise my work and include the name of the sea. Okay. So this becomes kind of convincing to the reader that yes, More is very serious about it. He does not want to hide anything or say anything fictitious. He has missed it, and he is asking his friends again and again to ask Raphael, because Raphael, as More writes in these letters, that I come to know that he is hale and hearty, he is living, so please ask him and let me know. So here he writes, for neither we remember to inquire of him, nor he to tell us in what part of the new world Utopia is situated. So when Raphael told the story, we did not ask him, nor did he tell us where exactly in the world Utopia, the island of Utopia, is situated. The which thing I had rather have spent no small sum of money than that it should thus have escaped us, as well for that I am ashamed to be ignorant in what sea that island standeth, whereof I write so long a treatise, and also because there be with us certain men, and especially one virtuous and godly man, and a professor of divinity, who is exceeding desire to go on to utopia. So you see how More is, creating this fabric of fictitious people, a doctor of divinity who after reading Utopia wants to go there and asking More the address. So More says that things are very serious. People really want to go there. So please ask Raphael and let me know the sea. Okay. The last paragraph of the letter. But nevertheless, friend Peter, do I pray you with Hythloday as I will do before. That is, you ask Hythloday. Then a letter to Jerome Busleyden, who was the provost of Ayr and counsellor to the Catholic King Charles. Peter Giles writing this letter to Jerome Busleyden, and writes about Thomas More's recent book Utopia. Now this is even more interesting because this letter, though apparently written by a real historical character to another real historical character, both Peter Giles and Jerome Busleyden were friends of Thomas More. But the letter is actually written by More himself and added to the book. So here More writes in the persona of Peter, Thomas More, the singular ornament of this our age, as you yourself can witness, to whom he is perfectly well known, sent unto me this other day the island of Utopia, to very few as yet known, but most worthy, which as far excelling Plato's Commonwealth, all people should be willing to know. Now, you may wonder, how can More praise himself in this manner? But this was the custom at that time in letter writing, that people always praised the other persons mentioned highly, according to the rhetorical practice of the time. High praise. The rhetoric was mostly rhetoric of praise or blame. So if More did not write in this manner, then the letter would not be convincing. Okay, so it becomes convincing that here is another man, Peter, who is writing to Jerome and praising More, whose book is next to Plato's Republic. Here there is a praise of Raphael also, that it is mentioned that Raphael belonged to the crew of Amerigo Vespucci. Moreover, whereas we be wont more effectually and pithily to declare and express things that we have seen, than which we have but only heard, there was besides that in this man a certain peculiar grace and singular dexterity to describe and set forth a matter withal. So Raphael Hythloday had a peculiar knack of telling stories. He told his stories gracefully and dexterously. Alright. But I suppose that this is also an allusion to the quality of spezzatura. In Renaissance Italy, the courtiers were supposed to have an easy eloquence. That is, they would speak or write very gracefully. That was called spezzatura. Shramuna has a question here. She asks whether Cardinal Morton, the liberal-minded man, is Thomas More. Now, I suppose that if you want to see the real Thomas More in these characters, then he is all of these. Okay, because all the characters are created by him, so some part of More is in every character. There is the character Thomas More itself in the book, but none of these characters express all the qualities of Thomas More. So as we know that Sir Thomas More was not very liberal minded. He was a conservative. He was a Roman Catholic. He even took part in some trials of witches. So it will be wrong to think that he was liberal minded like we moderns understand by what is liberal minded. But in the book he presents a dialogue. So as you know that dialogue was a very popular Renaissance genre. Not only Renaissance, it was very famous. Beginning from Plato's dialogue, Cicero also wrote a number of dialogues, and in the Renaissance also the dialogue form became very popular because it offered the opportunity of representing different points of view. So here More, as a true humanist, uses the advantages of the dialogue form and presents different points of view through these different characters. Then in this letter from Peter Giles to Jerome Busleyden, he writes, only a meter of 4 verses written in the Utopian tongue, which after Master More's departure, Hythloday by chance showed me, that have I caused to be added thereto with the alphabet of the same nation. Verse in the Utopian language, the alphabet of the Utopian language, all these were annexed to the Latin editions, which of course modern translations do not include anymore. But to make it convincing, More devised the alphabet of Utopian tongue. So it was similar to the Greek alphabet but not exactly the same, to some extent different. And there was a verse written in that language. So you can see the extent to which More went in order to present it as a true story and make the story convincing to the reader. It is almost like today's science fictions. Science fiction writers, they try their best to make their story convincing. Then More writes to Peter Giles. At the end of the letter, he writes that many people are asking about the coordinates of Utopia, where exactly Utopia is situated. So, if they are so unbelieving as not to trust even these, let them go to Hythloday himself, for he is yet living. Only recently I heard from some who had just come from Portugal that on March 1 last he was as well and strong as ever. So More gives even date and to make it very convincing that even on March 1 people came from Portugal and told me that Hythloday was alive and well. Let them ask him, let them worm out the truth from him if they please by their questions, but let them understand that all I can do is to reproduce the story faithfully, not to guarantee the truth of what I was told. So I can only reproduce Raphael's story, I cannot guarantee its truth. So now you can see the trick. So undoubtedly More was undertaking a dangerous job, that is criticizing the governance in England. when an absolute monarch like Henry VIII was in power. Therefore, More suggests that none of this comes from me. I have not created a thing. Everything is told by Raphael. So I cannot be blamed for this, And of course there is an overt criticism of English laws, which was very dangerous. But at that time, 1515, More was still deliberating over the question of permanently joining the court, becoming a courtier, whether to become a government officer or not. He had even for I think 2 years joined a monastery and planned to become a monk. So he was still divided in his mind. Which career should he pursue? Whether he should take up a government office or he should, become a man of religion. Therefore, in the first book, there is a debate whether anybody should accept government office or not. Because the character Thomas More tells Raphael that you will do very well, you have all, you have a lot of knowledge, you know a number of languages, and therefore you have many qualities that make you suitable for joining the court as a courtier. So think about accepting the public office, and thereby you can serve the country much better. To which Raphael, replies in the negative. He says that I do not want to join any public office, and he gives his reasons why one should not join the public office. Okay, so there is this debate here, which represents the contention, the doubts that More had at that time, the debate going on in his mind. And it also reminds me of the situation of Erasmus. As you know that Erasmus was requested by many kings in Europe to permanently join their court. But he always refused. He went to different courts in Europe, and he even came to England. He temporarily, stayed or lived in those countries and helped them about religious matters and so on, or literary matters. But he did not become a public servant. He refused to be the servant of any king. So we may say that Erasmus was the first example of an intellectual who loved his freedom. Because the moment an intellectual joins a public office, he becomes a servant of the government, and then he cannot criticize that government. Right. So the idea of Buddhijivi that we have here in our country, Buddhijivi is a strange word. It suggests like Shramojivi, that is one who lives by selling one's labor. So Buddhijivi should be one who lives by selling his intellect. But what has turned the situation has turned to this, that Buddhijivis live by selling their souls. So they not only sell their intellect, they sell their souls. They cannot criticize the government from which they get, a lot of perquisites, a lot of benefits. So the European idea of intellectual, that is an idea where the intellectual is free. He can criticize anybody, any government, any power. He only follows his wisdom or his intellect. So the first book begins, it is titled Concerning the Best State of a Commonwealth. Now what is the best state of a Commonwealth? That still remains a dilemma. We have yet not solved this problem. So even in modern times, the different forms of government which are there, none of them is fully satisfactory. And the world has not been able to resolve this problem. If they had, then there would have been only one form of government in the entire world. But that doesn't happen. There are many countries with different kinds of government. There are dictatorships, there are, parliamentary democracy and other forms of government. So each and every country has his or has its own constitution, own form of government. So there are welfare states like in the Scandinavian countries, and there are our states in South Asia which are unable to provide any welfare to the people. It provides rather farewell to the people. So fare you well, go to the hospital, have corona and goodbye. Okay. So welfare is very difficult to achieve unless the government has lot of resources. The Scandinavian countries are able to do that because they have lot of wealth, but they also do not enter into any arms race. But we in South Asia, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Burma, Ceylon, Singal, Sri Lanka, we are so clever that we enter into arms race with powers like China and even India and Pakistan, Afghanistan. So are these states or failed states? We do not know, because these countries are full of poor people. So we have a few, billionaires. So India every day has more and more billionaires. But even then, even if the number of billionaires is 10 or 20, the number of poor people is in crores, in billions. Therefore, that wealth concentrated in the hands of a few does not help billions of people. They still suffer, they die without treatment, and they do not get food. On the other hand, we see such states as Ethiopia or some African states where people have so much misrule, so much dictatorship, oppression, that they simply do not get the food, they starve and they die. Very soon in Afghanistan, lots of people are going to die without getting food. Afghanistan is not very far from us. So if that is still the state of our world, that we, let alone resolve this question of true government or best government, we cannot provide a basic form of governance. Therefore, More's book remains very relevant even today, because it is an intervention in this political debate about the best form of government. So in the first book, More describes how in the city of Bruges he came to meet Peter Giles, and More went to Flanders there on a commission sent by the king. He met Giles, who was a citizen of Antwerp, and Giles introduces him to Raphael. So we come to the point where More meets Raphael. Then I conjectured not far amiss, quoth I, for even at the first sight I judged him to be a mariner. Nay, quoth he, there you were greatly deceived. He had sailed, indeed, not as the mariner Palinurus, but as the expert and prudent Prince Ulysses. So, Peter says that Raphael is a mariner, is a sailor, indeed, but he is not a sailor like Palinurus. Palinurus was, in Roman mythology, a careless traveler. In the Aeneid, we have the character Palinurus, who was a careless traveler, and Ulysses, you all know, was a successful traveler. So Raphael was more like Ulysses than like Palinurus. Here rather as the ancient and sage philosopher Plato. So he is as wise as Plato, he can be compared to Plato. Learned, this Raphael Hypsipyle is very well learned in the Latin tongue, but profound and excellent in the Greek language. Now you see, More is always putting into contest Latin and Greek, because Greek is the other of the European West. Latin is their identity. So Greek is their other. And the fact that Raphael is better versed in Greek suggests that he is the other of an Englishman, wherein he ever bestowed more study than in the Latin, because he had given himself wholly to the study of philosophy. Now that is another reason that Greek is well known for its philosophy, whereas in Latin the greatest philosopher that you have are Cicero and Seneca, but they mostly follow Greek philosophy. So Cicero followed a kind of skepticism which was called academic skepticism, and there is only one book by Cicero on this called Academica, which I have not been able to find yet. His orations, his books on rhetoric, they are much easily found. Alright. So Cicero was better known as an orator, as a writer on rhetoric, or even a political orator. The many orations that he delivered in the law courts, they are also available. But his philosophical speculations or philosophical writings in Academica, that book I have not yet been able to find. Seneca, moral philosophy, considered, mostly imitative of Greek philosophy. Therefore, Roman philosophy cannot be compared to Greek philosophy. Marcus Aurelius also skeptic. So one who studies Greek knows philosophy much better. Philosophy suggests wisdom, love of knowledge, and wisdom is one thing and information is another. So T.S. Eliot has written, where is the knowledge that we have lost in information? Where is the wisdom that we have lost in knowledge? Where is the knowledge that we have lost in information? Today we have an age of information. The more information we have, the less we have knowledge. The more knowledge we have, the less we have wisdom. Right. Therefore, we may say that by studying Greek, Raphael could be more of a wise man than one who has only information. So here he describes how when his master Amerigo Vespucci stopped in the middle of his expedition and went back to Italy. Then Raphael and some of his friends stayed back and continued their journeys. So it is these unknown journeys in course of which Raphael came to Utopia. And More says that, writes that Raphael in his adventure, that is after the departure of Amerigo Vespucci, Raphael was on his own, and in his travels he came across many nations. So the nations which will be mentioned in the first book, and these nations, they have their own laws and customs, and these were great discoveries because it is possible to find strange places and even strange creatures or monsters, as we read in the traveler stories in the early days. But for nothing is more easy to be found than be barking Scyllas, ravening Selenos and Laestrygons, devourers of people and such like great and incredible monsters. But to find citizens ruled by good and wholesome laws, that is an exceeding rare and hard thing. So you see the irony here. More writes that it is much easier to find strange monsters or cannibals eating people, such things, but it is much more difficult to find countries which are ruled by good laws and where people can live happily. It is extremely rare to find such nations, and Raphael made certain discoveries, therefore more praises him for these discoveries. So it is Peter Geiss, who tells Raphael that you may join the court. Peter, much marvelling at the man, "Surely, Master Raphael," quoth he, "I wonder greatly why you get you not into some king's court. For I am sure there is no prince living that would not be very glad of you, as a man not only able highly to delight him with your profound learning, and this your knowledge of countries and peoples, but also meet to instruct him with examples and help him with counsel. And thus doing, you shall bring yourself in a very good case, and also be of ability to help all your friends and kinsfolk." So this proposal by Peter that Raphael should join the court of a king and can help the king. "As concerning my friends and kinsfolk," quoth he, "I pass not greatly for them, for I think that I have sufficiently done my part towards them already. For these things that other men do not depart from until they be old and sick, which they be then very loath to leave when they can no longer keep, those very same things did I, being not only lusty and in good health, but also in the flower of my youth, divide among my friends and kinsfolk." So he says that people, when they become very old, then with much reluctance they share their property with their kins, their relatives. But I did that when I was young. So I did my duty towards my kinsfolk and my friends when I was young. Which I think with this my liberality ought to hold them contented, and not to require nor to look that besides this I should for their sake give myself in bondage unto kings. Therefore I have done my duty to my relatives already, and it is not right that for their sake now I should hold myself in bondage to a king, that is, be the slave of a king. Peter tries to explain that he did not mean him to be a slave, to a wealthier condition, nay, God forbid that, quoth Peter, it is not my mind that you should be in bondage to kings, but as a retainer to them at your pleasure, which surely I think is the nighest way that you can devise how to bestow your time fruitfully, not only for the private commodity of your friends and for the general profit of all sorts of people, but also for the advancement of yourself to a much wealthier state and condition that you now be in. So Peter says that if you join the court of a king, then you will of course help the country and the people, but you also yourself will be richer, wealthier. To a wealthier condition, quoth Raphael, by that means that my mind standeth clean against. Now I live at liberty after mine own mind and pleasure, which I think very few of these great states and peers of realms can say. Yeah, and there be enough of them that sue for great men's friendships, and therefore think it no great hurt if they have not me, nor 3 or 4 such other as I am. So he says that the peers, that is the advisors to the king, are they in a happy state of mind, and do they feel to be in liberty? So very few of them feel to be in liberty or are happy. And since there are so many people who want to be in the king's service, actually there was a stiff competition in the Tudor times for getting the job in a court or becoming a courtier. So when so many people want this job, if 3 or 4 persons like me do not want it, then it will not hurt them. It is all right. So More says, well, I perceive plainly, friend Raphael, that you be desirous neither of riches nor of power, and truly I have in no less reverence and estimation a man of your mind than any of them all that be so high in power and authority. But you shall do as it becometh you, and according to this wisdom, to this high and free courage of yours, if you can find in your heart so to appoint and dispose yourself, that you may apply your wit and diligence to the profit of the will public. So now More adds an argument in favor of joining the public service, saying that by joining this, okay, I accept that you do not want wealth or power for yourself, but if you join public service, then you can benefit the people for the will public. So will public or commonwealth. Common here refers to the people. Wealth refers to their well-being. Will or wealth. So if you join this service, then you will be able to do something for the well-being of the people. So this is a charitable cause, and More offers this argument. Now we all know that what happened after More joined the public service. He ended up being a prisoner and then being executed. However, he definitely have thought that he served the people and not the king. Now, today it is easier to think that a public servant serves the people because we do not have absolute monarchy. But where there was absolute monarchy, then every important public servant was bound to obey the monarch. That is, nobody had any freedom. Today there is marginal freedom. What is freedom? Freedom is an ideal. And what do we men do? we always deviate from the ideal. We can never reach any ideal. So, what is Raphael's answer to this argument? He says that you are twice deceived, first in me and again in the thing itself. So you are deceived in me, that is, I will be able to really benefit the people in my qualities. Secondly, in the thing itself, that anybody can benefit the people by being a public servant. Alright. So we'll look at this answer of Raphael in the next class. Do you have any questions?